Hey, how's everybody doing today? This is Mark Brody, and I'm back with another episode of Coffee Talk with Brohawk. And today I am humbled and honored to have Doug Rabold as my guest on today's episode. Doug, how you doing?
Hey, Mark, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure and my honor. I mean, you're a rock star in the contact center world, so it's a pleasure to have you, Doug. For those who may not know much about you, which I can't imagine there's that many people that don't know who you are, but for those that don't, can you introduce yourself and what have you been up to?
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Mark. So Doug Rabold, I've been in this space, if you will, this customer experience, customer service space for officially for about 15 years now. But I did a midlife career transition. My first career was in financial sales and services, and I did it all, you name it. Stocks, bonds, mutual funds, variable annuities, property and casualty insurance, life and health, you name it. If it was a financial product, I was probably involved in selling it.
Nice.
But my approach in that career was very different than most people that are in sales, and that is I wasn't always pitching the flavor of the day. In fact, I very rarely was pitching the flavor of the day because if everybody's chasing it, they're probably too late. Um,
Yes.
so my approach was always very much based on the relationship and identifying what the goals, wants, desires, and needs were,
Hmm.
and then identifying a solution to that. And so really transitioning into customer experience was very natural for me because in essence that's what we do in customer experience is we provide solutions that meet needs, requirements, and allow us those aspirational opportunities to grow and develop. So, it was 15 years ago I made that transition, and I started off at the bottom. I started off taking calls overnight on an IT service desk. I gave up, a six-figure a year career in sales to earn $32,000 for a couple of years. But I was paying my dues. And since then it's really just been an opportunity that has grown for me. And so yeah, the last couple of years I've throughout my career I've in once I moved into CX, I've been blessed by being surrounded by good people, by being able to identify the talent that I'm not great when it comes to everything. So I know my weaknesses as well as my strengths. So finding the people that are complementary skilled to me, but then also being blessed with exceptional leaders that have helped grow and develop me. And so the last couple of years have just been really amazing. And I started speaking at conferences about 4 or 5 years ago, and apparently my message has resonated because I keep getting asked back. So they haven't told me to shut up yet. And then just in the last couple of years, I've started during the pandemic, I started appearing on some podcasts, and I've added to my resume, if you will. Doug has become a serial podcast guest. Um, you know,
Nice.
I, I cherish the those of you who actually host these things because I know I do not have the patience to actually do all the administrative tasks involved in setting it up and and being there and being ready and tolerating guests who don't show up on time and what have you. So, hats off to you, Mark, and those
Oh,
of you who I've guested with.
yeah, it's fun, and I've seen you speak before. You were a speaker at our Austin Contact Center Alliance recent luncheon, and I mean your message. You're right. Your message resonates with those who hear you speak, and so if any of you have a conference that Doug is going to be speaking at, definitely see one of his sessions. I'm gonna start off our conversation with that. I mean, because he really has Doug really does, you really do a great job, when you're speaking in front of a crowd. I definitely see you as somebody that gets energy from actually speaking in front of people and with people. At least that's been my experience, whether we're grabbing a coffee in person or, at a conference or something. So, um, you know, you're also involved in some other associations as well. Is it HDI that you're
Yes.
involved with? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what do you do with them?
So when I first connected, or when I first transitioned into my new career, one of
Yeah.
the things that I wanted to do, based on my sales background, was always network. Find
Yes. Yes.
opportunities to network, because one, then you have resources who you can bounce ideas off of, but two, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, because somebody's probably already tried everything that you've come up with in your head, right? Um, so one of the first things I did when I transitioned into my second career was look for an organization that was like-minded and doing similar things to what I was doing in my new career. And HDI sort of fit that bill.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I really just started as a member, and after a couple of years of attending meetings, and again, my first 2 years in that new career, I was working overnight, so I'd come in, probably red-eyed and dragging myself into this meeting room. But everybody saw I showed up every, month after month, every month. Doug was there, even though he, was dragging his sorry butt in. and and so at one point they said, "Hey, would you be interested in being an officer, at the chapter?" And I'd be like, I said, "Yeah, sure. I'd consider it. What's entailed?" And so they kind of went through what was involved. And so I became a local chapter officer, and sort of worked my way through the chairs here at the local chapter in San Antonio. Was then asked if I was interested in a national office position, and so I became a district president, and then a regional vice president, and actually became the national president for the national board of directors, and now I'm the chairman for the national board. And the whole idea being is that I felt like I got so much from this organization,
Yeah.
and then it became time to give back, and that's what it's been about. And so in my chairman role now, what I'm doing is I'm helping drive the strategic initiatives for, and frankly, any chapter driven organization, and ours is not unique, but any chapter driven organization right now is struggling.
Yeah.
Memberships have been down, and this goes across the board with many orgs. Membership is down. People are less willing to meet in person than maybe they were in 2019 and before, whether
Hmm.
that's by choice, or whether it's by the fact that they're accustomed now to speaking over a screen, as opposed to getting together in a room. But we've seen our struggles, but what we're doing is we're mapping out a strategy for how do we evolve with the changing dynamics of a member driven org, and I think we've come up with some pretty good ideas. And we've reached a stasis level. There were, and really the erosion in membership began even before the pandemic. It just sort of accelerated with the pandemic, but in the last year or so, we've reached a stabilization rate.
Hmm.
And we actually have added a couple of chapters in the last couple of years. So we're starting to
Excellent.
see signs of life again. So where maybe winter is turning to spring. But
There you go.
yeah, I would encourage anybody who is involved in IT service management or in the service desk environment, take a look at HDI. We have 25 chapters across the country, and we have some more sprouting up. So
Well, and if you don't have one in your particular area, hey, Doug, you might be able to help them get one started, for sure.
yeah,
That's actually, you know, um, great advice. I mean, if you're looking for new opportunities to network, or you're in a career pivot, um, taking a look at different associations that are in your neck of the woods, so to speak, or your region, to see, okay, let me learn a little bit about what's going on in this industry or that industry, or this vertical or that vertical, or whatever the case may be. So, I mean, how you described, doing your career pivot, would you recommend that, for sure, for anybody else that's kind of like either been in or about to approach, some sort of pivot, or voluntary career change.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if it's involuntary, which there's a lot of these days too,
Mhm.
if you find yourself in a position where you're sort of checking and adjusting and moving into something new,
Yeah.
don't feel you got to take all the lumps all over again. I was already 42 years old when I made that change, and I had been through my share of career mistakes,
Uh-huh.
and I didn't want to fall victim to the same mistakes just in a new industry.
Yeah.
So find people, and whether it's I mean, it can be as simple as finding an online community,
Mhm.
but find opportunities to network with people who are already doing what it is that you intend to be doing for the next 6 months, year, 5 years, whatever that is.
Yeah.
But yeah, connect and it's amazing. I think back to the very first conference I went to when I moved into my new career.
Mhm.
Um, LinkedIn was brand new at the time. I
Yeah.
had no idea what LinkedIn was, but being an old sales guy, I was accustomed to walking around with business cards. And
Yeah.
I'm at this conference, my first conference, and I'm trying to pass out business cards, and people are looking at me like I have lobsters crawling out of my ears. They're like, we're in IT. We don't carry business cards. What are you thinking, right? So I'm like, well, how do I stay connected with these people that I'm meeting? Because some of them had some really good ideas, and it just so happened I ran into a guy that he was a lead at Texas Tech University. So he was just on their service desk as a lead, and he's like, "Hey, there's this new thing I'd like to show you." He says, "Pull out your phone." So I pull out my phone. He says,
Mhm.
"Download the LinkedIn app." And I'm like, "What is that?" And I'm like, "It sounds like social media." He's like,
Yeah.
"Well, it kind of is, but it's networking." I was like, "All right, let's
Yes.
give it a try." So he was one of my very first connections on LinkedIn. He showed me how to use it, and it's been transformational for me in my career. I mean, I have kept in touch with him for these 12 or 13 years since he and I first met. He's now like a senior director at Texas Tech.
Wow.
I've obviously moved around quite a bit, and we've been able to stay in touch just by having that opportunity to connect. And even though we've only seen each other in person twice, both times at a conference, we've tracked each other's careers, and we still to this day bounce ideas off one another.
That is awesome. I mean, and networking doesn't have to be this grandiose, thing where, a lot of people are intimidated by networking, but it could be something as simple as just reaching out to somebody that has an interesting post on LinkedIn, or, you may follow them, on, uh, just some of the stuff that they're posting out there on, LinkedIn or Twitter, or wherever your social media is, um, and just reaching out, and a lot of people that post things. I know you're really good at this. Um, if you reach out, you're going to respond, and you're going to create that connection, and you just never know where those connections are going to lead to, both professionally and personally.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Mark, I think the first time you and I connected was actually on LinkedIn, if I'm not
It
mistaken.
was, yeah.
Yeah,
It was, I think, a mutual connection of ours.
right.
Um, said, "Hey, you guys need to be talking," and then we connected, and we're like, "Yeah, we do need to be talking,"
Right.
and
Yeah.
it's been good. It's been good. Um, and so let me ask a question, because we talked a little bit about career pivots and stuff like that, but you've had a very successful career. You've done a lot, throughout your professional career. I'm particularly interested in learning about your thoughts on this statement. So, at this stage of my career, I wish I could go back and tell my younger self this. And how would that have helped you navigate, if you would have had that advice back when you first started? How would it have, helped you navigate your career differently, or maybe you'd go down the same path?
Yeah. So that's a great question, Mark. And the way I would respond to that, and this is probably going to be a little different than maybe some of your previous guests that have responded to this. I would say don't do anything differently. If something interests you, pursue it. If there's something that if there's a dream you want to chase, chase it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what I've done. Those who may look at my LinkedIn profile will see I've done a little bit of everything, and I never let the grass grow under my feet. Even when I've stayed with one employer for, 8, 9, 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
I never had the same job for more than a year and a half. I was
Yeah.
always transitioning around within a given employer if I wasn't jumping to another one. And people are probably going to think, what is this guy, a job hopper? No, it's just I grow very restless with operationalization. When things
Mm-hmm.
get to steady state, I grow bored. I'm very much a believer in transformational leadership,
Yeah.
and transformational leadership does not lend itself to operationalization.
Mm-hmm.
We get it there, but we're not content then to just sit there and let it cook, and
Yes.
but we're not ready to wait for the steak to get to well done. We're happy when it's rare to medium rare, right?
Yeah, 'cause we're
Um,
hungry. We want to eat.
yeah, maybe just blue. We get it to where it's blue, right?
There you
Um,
go.
yeah, but and so I would just reinforce to my younger self, keep chasing those dreams, and stay restless. I mean, that sounds awful, because people want comfort in their lives. A lot of people are just looking for, hey, I just want to get to that point where I'm comfortable, and I can just kick back and relax. I don't want to ever get there.
Yes.
I look at people like my father's contemporaries who they felt that way, and they retired, and they felt like they had a successful career, they retired, and they were dead a year later. It's like,
Yeah.
and I told my dad when he retired, I said, Dad, don't just retire. And
Yes.
he opened a consulting business. He took my advice and he opened a consulting business. He lived, my dad lived to 80, 88 years old, and he spent the last 10 years consulting. Um,
Yes.
so so that would be my advice, is just don't grow complacent. Continue to think, grow, develop, and chase those dreams.
It's interesting. My wife and I have conversations. She's like, "When are you going to be ready to retire?" I'm like, When I'm dead." Um, because I'll have plenty of time to sleep then. I just have I'm of the same thought process is if I'm not doing something, and I mean, I'll still go out and play golf, you know, uh, you know, vacation, or if I have the opportunity to, but doing something just to stay active. I love that. Be restless, be comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yes.
And I love that sentiment that you shared. And I think that there are quite a few people that would share that same sentiment as you, on the advice. And it's not like what you hear in these commencement speeches of, you know, follow your passions, and don't worry about paying the bills. Um, but it's, follow your passion and be able to create a life that you're comfortable with is more, I
Right.
think, of where you're coming from. You
Yeah.
know.
And I'll tell you a corollary to this, and I didn't follow this one myself,
Mhm.
but knowing your family situation, I
Yeah.
think you'll enjoy this. It'll resonate with you. My parents had me when they were later in life. My parents were both in their 40s when they had me. I was a surprise.
Yeah.
And my mom told me about probably a couple of years before she passed away. My mom told me, she's like, Doug, I want you to know you kept us young. And I felt so good about that, right? And so it's sort of that corollary too. I didn't let them grow complacent. They had
Mhm.
to, I was still a teenager when they were in their 60s. And
Yes.
so, they had to deal with a teenager in their 60s. So
Wow. You know what? I think I'm going to be in that same situation now that I
yeah,
think of it. Yeah, um, it's amazing when you have that youthful mindset and your body's willing to go along with you on that youthful mindset. How much it does for, just keeping that positive outlook.
yes.
And so Again, I love that sentiment. Um, we talked a little bit about at a you spoken at an Austin Contact Center Alliance luncheon recently, and one of the things that really resonated with me uh, during that conversation was you weren't regurgitating the same CX, speak that we hear coming from a lot of people. You really went into some thought leadership here, and specifically, when it comes to, some of the defining metrics of how good a contact center is, or how good a customer service or service desk is performing. People to look at CSAT or NPS or CES, and um, you know but you started leaning into this metric called QSTAC, QSTAC, and then you went a little bit further. You took that to the next level, and you said, look, don't just look at SLAs, look at XLAs, because that's next level stuff right there. So can you explain a little bit about QStack and XLAs, and what those measurements are really looking at, and why somebody should be looking at those?
Yeah. How much time do we have? Because
Yeah. Reader's Digest version.
right. So QStack, and I'm not going to take any credit for QStack. My good
Yeah.
friend Ben Brennan, who used to be a director at multiple Silicon Valley companies, actually came up with the idea behind QStack, and implemented it internally,
Mhm.
um, in multiple career stops he had very successfully, and since then he's actually spun that out as a company of his own. But QSEC, and I am not, that is not a paid endorsement, so
No, no, no.
yeah. But QStack, it's it's so intuitive, and yet it's what we often forget when we do survey design. It's what's important to the customer. And what's
Yeah.
important to the customer is QSTAC is an acronym. It's quality, speed, technical aptitude, approachability, and communication. So
Mhm.
quality is, are they doing it right, and they doing it right the first time?
Yeah.
Speed is, are they doing it in a time frame in which I think it should be done? Not what the
Mhm.
SLA is, that probably hasn't been revisited in 10 years, but in
Yes,
if I
yes.
looked, if I went to Google, or I went to or I went to YouTube, could I fix it faster than these turkeys are doing it, right?
Mhm.
So that's the speed. Technical aptitude is just what it sounds like.
Yep.
Do they seem like they know what they're doing, or are
Mhm.
they fumbling around? Is the knowledge base not very robust, and so they're you know trying every which way to sideways.
Yeah.
Approachability is just that. Do they seem to be engaged? Do they want to talk to me? Do or if it's a face-to-face interaction, when I walk up, do they go like this? Yeah. And then communication is, am I just being kept informed? Do I have to chase down a status update over and over and over again? Right. And
Yeah.
so those are, it's very intuitive what QStack is: quality, speed, technical ability, approachability, and communication. That's what people want from an
Yes.
experiential interaction. And yet that's usually not what our questions, when we go through all these, these CSAT and NPS and CES, those aren't the questions we're asking. We're
Yeah.
asking questions that talk about how we did, not about how you feel,
Yes.
right? And then XLA, so that's the Q stack piece. So XLA is just sort of is measuring the things that are important to a customer at the time that they're important. And so the Q stack approach is sort of that first iteration of XLA, but XLAs can be very tailored. And I think the example I used when I spoke with you folks was, um, you know, people go to Disney, or people go to Six Flags. The
Mhm.
expectation when you go to either of those two is very different. So what
Yes.
I expect from a Disney experience is significantly higher than what I expect from a Six Flags experience. They're both
Mhm.
good, but
Yeah.
one costs a lot more, and there's a reason it costs a lot more, because they're
Mhm.
delivering a lot more, and so your level of expectation is higher. So XLA, so SLAs tend to be fairly uniform across an industry. So, if you go to one or go to the other, the SLAs, the underpinning expectations are probably going to be the same. But what they
Hmm.
deliver from the way you feel, the sentiment that you get when you leave,
Yeah.
that's where it's going to be different. And so those XLAs, experience level agreements that you would devise for a Disney would be very different than those what you would devise for a Six Flags.
Hmm. Yep. Um, so so eh, SLAs are really looking at, um, from your perspective, where, what do you need to staff to minimally achieve the customer expectation, where XLAs are really looking at where you need to, be creating that connection, um,
Yeah, very much
with
so.
with
And
the
and
customer.
yeah, and so SLAs typically are going to be contractual. I mean, there's
Yeah.
going to be some negotiation. They're contractual, and so this is what I commit. This is my service promise to you, right?
Yes.
Um, whereas the XLA goes beyond that
Hmm.
and it becomes a commitment. And
Yes.
so commitment is different than contractual, right? Commitment
Hmm.
is okay, I'll deliver the SLA
Yeah.
that I got to do, right? I'm absolutely contractually bound to do that. But above that, what you want extends beyond what I'm contractually obligated to do. So my commitment to you is to try to deliver that, which is an even better level of service, right?
Yes.
And the other thing about that is SLAs, because they're contractual, tend to be very static. They tend to
Yep.
be very long lived. And again, that I sort of call it the cost of doing business. That's the
Hmm.
minimally viable product, if you will.
Yep.
Whereas XLAs tend to evolve and change. They tend to be very dynamic. And the example that I always go back to, and I don't even need to cite a specific example. I can
Hmm.
just give you a scenario. So if you negotiated a contract with someone back in, say, November of 2019,
Hmm.
you put SLAs in place and you committed to deliver those for the next 3, 5, whatever years. Um, but from an experience perspective, you wouldn't want to put those in that contract because if you fast forward from November of 2019 to, say, March or April of
Yeah.
2020, the experience shifted. I mean, the paradigm shift was just incredibly fast, right? We
Yes.
had to go from if you needed support and you could walk into your local retail, let's say your cell phone, you walk into the local cell phone store and say, hey, I
Hmm.
need this, I got a problem, and it could be just be a minor problem. Well,
Yep.
2020, they weren't even open. You couldn't go there, right? So you
Yes.
had to call for support. You had to wait in this massive queue,
Uh-huh.
and then when you finally got to somebody, you had to hope and pray that they knew how to answer your response or answer your request, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, and then you had to fix it yourself because there
Yes.
was nobody to do it for you. And so from an experience perspective, those things changed very dramatically. And yet
Hmm.
the underlying SLAs really should have never changed. I mean, you pay your
Yep.
bill, you get your cell phone service. I mean, that's just the way it works.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
know, using that example, I think that, in the customer service world, and I think probably in the service desk world, as well, or support desk world, um, you know, during the beginnings of the pandemic, um, folks on the phones got a lot of leniency, um, for um, for being human,
Yes.
um, and having, like a dog, you know, on a Zoom call, or barking or whatever. Um, a child, crying in the
Mhm.
background, or whatever the case may be. Life was happening. And I think that people, um, understood a lot more about, HX rather than EX or CX. It became very, very focused on the human experience,
Yes.
which then I mean, a natural, um, a natural transition is XLAs, because how is that, what's that consumer, that callers or email or chat or whatever, what's their experience expectation of that interaction, regardless of the channel.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting a little bit more. Um, we've gone away from being okay um, with some of the barking dogs and kids in the background, and we're trying to figure out how to get back to that pre 20 March 2020 um, you know situation. So experience expectations, they're going to be ever evolving
Yes. Yeah,
throughout,
absolutely.
you know um, and they're not, and consumers aren't just comparing you to your cell phone experience, or the customer service for one cell phone company versus another cell phone company. They're comparing what their experience is like with you know Amazon, or uh, Southwest Airlines, or whoever is like top of, and neither one of those were pitches or paid endorsements in any way, shape, or form for any company that's mentioned here. Uh, but I mean, they're comparing to top tier experience and interactions, and it could be something as simple as a mom and pop shop. You know,
Yeah.
uh, so yeah, it just an interesting observation.
Yeah, absolutely. And XLA, and that's why I asked how much time you have, because
Yeah.
XLA, I could drone on that topic for hours, and
Hmm.
it's a very esoteric concept until you actually look at it. And so sometime I'm doing a lot of presentations on that right now. So if
Yeah.
anybody in your audience gets a chance to sit down with me or attend a presentation on XLA, I can go into even greater depth than what I shared with you folks at ACCA. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's so interesting that the way that it looks at things, because it doesn't ignore the operational data.
Yep.
Um, it just uses that as a feeder into the experiential data, and
Hmm.
and and ultimately you draw in from multiple data points from, and this is where it becomes challenging to explain to people that are in operations, because people in operations tend to be very focused within their tower. They're
Yes.
focused within their span of control.
Hmm.
But experience spans across towers. And
Yes.
so it's the vertical versus the horizontal. Experience
Hmm.
operates very horizontally,
Yeah.
whereas operations operates very vertically. So that's my challenge as a CX strategist in many cases, is helping operations people understand that it's not just what you control that
Yes.
means something to the customer.
I love it. It sounds like we may have to do a webinar. You and I were talking about this, before we got on. Maybe we do something like beers with Brohawk or something like that,
Yeah,
and get to an XLA discussion.
we'd have to do that as an after dusk event, but
There
yeah,
you
I'd be
go.
down with that.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we've gotten to the point of the conversation where I call the speed round. Are you ready, Doug?
Sure. Yeah,
All
absolutely.
right. So, what fact about Doug would people be most surprised to learn about you?
The thing that I think people would be, this is, I always have some go-to answers when you do two truths and a lie.
Yeah.
So I'll give one of mine away right now. I have actually met three presidents of the United States while they were U.S. president. I
Really?
met Jimmy Carter at his inauguration. I
Okay.
met um, I met Ronald Reagan when he was on his whistle stop train tour of the
Okay.
Midwest. I was the scout, the senior patrol leader for my scout troop, and presented him the colors when he came to our little town. And then I met Bill Clinton when he was running for reelection. He came to University of Illinois, and I was a student guide. So
Excellent.
yeah,
That is really, really cool. um, and in the situations that you were in, to meet them. I mean, that's, hats off to you.
Thanks.
Always been leading.
Yep.
So, um, so after a stressful day, um, what's your go-to tactic to kind of unwind?
That's the toughest thing for me because and I think I've told you this before, Mark. I only
Uh,
half jokingly say I have three full-time jobs. So,
uh,
yeah, between my day job and my HDI responsibilities, and then my speaking gigs.
uh,
But what I do, I am a huge Bayern Munich soccer fan, but I just love soccer of all kinds. And
okay.
I had, ironically enough, I had the proverbial cup of coffee as a professional soccer player. I spent 5 minutes on a one-day contract playing for a team in Hershey, Pennsylvania. But
Very cool.
I like to sit down and just veg on watching a soccer game and just enjoy what they call the most beautiful sport.
And it's like a 90-minute vacation for you.
It is, yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
Yep. That's awesome. So, Doug, just finally, I mean, I love talking to you. I mean, we always seem to find those purple squirrels to go down and chase during our conversations, which I absolutely love. But if someone wants to pick your brain, find out a little bit more about HDI or networking, any consulting services that you might offer also, or like I said, just pick your brain about QSTAC, XLA, or any other burning issue that they may have. What's the best way that they can go ahead and contact you?
Yeah, so I already alluded to this when we were talking about LinkedIn. And you mentioned I'm very active on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I've made a lot of connections through LinkedIn, and it's the easiest way to keep in touch with me. Like I said, I don't let the grass grow under my feet. So, if I had ever handed a business card to that guy at Texas Tech, it probably would have
Uh,
been good for a couple of years, and then he would have lost touch with me. So,
yeah.
feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's the first option is follow, but if you actually want to connect with me instead of just following, just put in there a comment that you saw me on Brohawk, and I'm happy to connect.
Awesome, awesome. And as always, if as you're watching this video, um, this episode, if you want me to do an actual introduction with Doug, not that that's needed because he'll respond to you. Um, but if you want me to do an actual introduction, I'd be more than happy to do that. Doug, I've reached out to him a couple of times recently on questions related to different things within the industry, and very knowledgeable. And the thing I love about Doug is that the thing I love about you, not talking in third person to you, but the thing I love about you is that if you don't know something, you're not going to fake it. you know you're not just going to try and give an answer just to satisfy a question, which I have the utmost level of respect for. So thank you for the professional networking that we've been able to do, but also the personal networking that we've been able to do over the last few years. So um,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. And once again, thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule to be a guest on Coffee Talk with Brohawk. I really appreciate it. And if you like this episode, hit the like button, make a comment. If you didn't like the episode, hit the like button, make a comment. We definitely want to, any feedback that you have or any comments, related to any of the content in this video. Definitely love to get that and share it out with Doug and the community as a whole. So, Doug, thank you very much, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Mark. Be
All
well,
right,
sir.
you too.